Hello, good evening, and welcome to Inside the Budget. This is where we look back at what happened over the last 24 hours when the Minister of Finance, the Honourable Ryan Shawn, for 2 hours and 45 minutes held the attention of the island as he delivered the budgetary proposals for 2026. I'm Barry Wilkinson. A pleasant good afternoon and good evening to you wherever you are in Barbados, throughout the Caribbean and around the world. We have an esteemed panel, and for the next 90 minutes we're going to look at policy intention versus implementation, and what a night we promise to give you. With me tonight to discuss inside the budget, to break it down and to tell you exactly what happened, how it happened, and some of the initiatives that the government wants to carry on for the rest of the year. Let's start first of all with the lone lady in the panel. She'll guide us like how Eve guided Adam. Kristin Turton, attorney at law, well-known Brasstacks moderator as well. She is with us. To her left, we have the president of ICAB, Mr. Damian Skeete. And we're so happy to have him because ICAB, they have been indeed very vocal about some of the things that the accountants in Barbados want to see in this year's budget. As we hop across the table, the president of the BCCI, the Barbados Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Paul Inniss, who's been speaking so well over the last couple of months as the new president of the BCCI. And to his right is the man from the Nation newspaper, one of the best correspondents in business in Barbados, Shawn Cumberbatch, who's been doing it for a number of years. And if you saw the Nation's newspaper today, their big headline was the budget that eased the pain. We're going to talk about some of the pain that we thought we were going to get. Instead, we got pleasure. Speaking of that, Justin Ram, he's with us as well, the noted economist. He's got a lot to say. Justin, a pleasant good evening to you. You're always all around the world. You look quite happy there. I think you're somewhere in Helsinki. I hope you're enjoying your evening wherever you are, but you've been following the events of the budget. So we've got a great panel, and we expect to have a very interesting show. You can also join us. The number 246-826-5827. Send us your WhatsApp messages, and if you have a question for the panel, we'll be happy to read it. Inside the Budget, brought to you in association with the Science and Technology Festival on Tuesday, the 24th of March, from 9:30 a.m. at the Queen's Park Steel Shed. The future starts here. Admission is free, presented by the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology in association with the Ministry of Educational Transformation, and carried live on VOB 92.9 FM. So let's get a quick synopsis first of all from the panel. Kristin, I come to you first. This year's budget delivered for the second time by Ryan Shawn, but this time he did it as the Minister of Finance. Last year he was the Minister in the Ministry of Finance, so it's perhaps a big time for him as well. In your estimation, did he do a good job, and how was the budget from your point of view?
I would say that he did a good job. I think what we saw, which I think was quite commendable, was a significant adjustment based on the external circumstances. We know that Barbadians have been crying out about cost of living for quite some time, but we also know that given the war in Iran and the volatility in the external geopolitical environment, that the situation could be much worse very soon. We've already started to see challenges in that department, particularly due to the rising cost of oil, but there are other considerations that may affect, for example, our tourism industry and the other international business sectors that could be affected by everything that's happening externally. The minister, and certainly the government as a whole, to my mind, pivoted quite well to make sure that they instituted, or at least they've announced, policy positions which can ease that burden. It doesn't mean that prices will not go up. It does not mean that there will not be shocks. But the concept is that they should be less than what they otherwise would have been. And they have done so primarily by trying to ensure that there is additional money in the pockets of Barbadians, but also looking at addressing other aspects of the tax system to reduce that. The challenge, of course, is going to be monitoring, making sure that intended cost savings exist and are passed on to consumers, as well as other aspects of the implementation process that they have struggled with in previous years. All right,
we'll come back and discuss a lot of that, but I must ask ICAB. The accountants, of course, of Barbados have been very, very vocal about some of the things within the last year that they think would make a big difference to what is the number one thing Barbadians have on their mind, which is the cost of living. Did the budget, from ICAB's perspective, meet and ease that fear that many Barbadians have?
Yes, good night to everyone. I would say, Barry, in short, I believe looking at the budget, it was a budget that was certainly fit for purpose given what we are seeing externally, as Panelists just mentioned. But what I was also happy with within the budget too was the deliberate intent to economic diversification.
Right.
And I think that is significant for any small and small island state like Barbados, because no longer you can rely solely on something similarly like tourism, obviously, because if what happens to that, what else happens to the rest of the economy? So I saw a deliberate intention to economic diversification, and particularly not because a lot of our constituents are small and medium-sized entities or small practitioners, but we did see some measures which seek to address the SME sector, because we know that the SME sector, again, in any small and small developing state, is really the backbone for fostering economic growth. And it also adds to the shock absorbers, as it were, in the economy. We also realized too, and we are also happy with the financial discipline that the government would have seen. So therefore, it was allowed then that you were able to, get some relief in the middle class and the lower income class. So that was also good to see.
Now, I come to Paul because the BCCI, they are an organization well respected in Barbados. And for some reason, since the 2018 elections, when there was a 30-love kind of advantage, I think the Chamber of Commerce kind of stepped up and presented a lot of challenges to government. And your role, the BCCI I'm speaking of, has become much more prevalent in the last almost decade now. The budget, did it meet the BCCI's expectations? And if not, perhaps what were you looking for?
Thank you, Barry, and good evening to Barbados. I think in general terms, we are supportive of the financial statements and budgetary proposals. I would say in some quarters we are happy, given that we were actually invited and contribute prior to the budgetary proposals. We were part of the Barbados Private Sector Association that engaged with government on several policies and certain expectations that we would want to see within the budget. So I think in addition to what you heard earlier, I think the targeted business measures as it relates to MSMEs, digitization, tourism, the revitalization of Bridgetown, the competitive nature of business, certainly are areas that we were happy to hear addressed to some extent in the budget. And we look forward to working with government to actually implement those things that were declared in the budget.
Now, Shawn, today's Nation, bag of medicine to ease pain. Big front page. You saw the minister having his big black bag. And there was this general feel that after the elections, all the sweetness was finished. And we're now going to have this painful kind of budget. That was not to be, essentially. From a layman perspective, was that perhaps, you think, the plan that the minister would have gone with for the next 3 months, at least, is a number of measures that we're seeing for the next 3 months, not showing that kind of pain that you expected?
Good night, Barry. Good night to viewers and listeners. I think even before the events, the unfortunate events currently ongoing in Iran and the wider Middle East, I think there was some anticipation by consumers that this budget would have contained some form of relief. I think the events which I just mentioned ongoing internationally, perhaps those events stimulated, led to the Minister of Finance perhaps doing more that he might have otherwise done in terms of the measures in relation to keeping the cost of energy down, for example, electricity bills, as well as efforts to ease shipping costs at the port and other measures. So I would say that the public anticipated, rightly so, that there would have been an ease in the cost of living. It was just a question of how far the Minister of Finance would have gone in giving that assistance.
Let's go to our noted economist, Mr. Justin Ram, who is online. Good evening to you, Justin.
Good evening.
Justin, now, several economists have had their particular say on the budget. You got to break it down for people because persons like myself and others who are watching, the general consensus, perhaps Kristin and perhaps Paul might know a bit more than us in terms of the numbers. This budget, was it the right antidote right now for Barbadians, and what's your general thought on the budget?
Well, my general thought around this budget is that it is what we were expecting, given the current circumstances that we find ourselves in, geopolitically, with respect to inflation, the cost of living crisis that we're seeing, not only in Barbados, but across the Caribbean region, as it were. Now, what is ironic is that when you look at the macroeconomic indicators for Barbados, those numbers are looking quite stellar. We have had many consecutive quarters of GDP growth. Our debt to GDP ratio has declined significantly from when this government first came to power in 2018. It was well over 170%, and now it's down to, I think it's around 93%, which is quite good. Unemployment is also quite low as well. But the irony of all of this is that the average person is still struggling. And I guess, in my humble opinion, what we have here is again another budget that is simply dealing with some of the symptoms and not dealing with the cause of some of the challenges that we face. And I think the main challenge that we face is that we are just not pursuing the right economic model for our small island economies in this part of the world. And unless we come to terms with that, we will always have to have budgets like this that seem to provide us with medicine to ease the pain, rather than budgets that are seeking to build up resilience of the average person so that they are able to weather whatever external shock might come their way. I think for me, I just think that this budget, unfortunately, is a lot of more of the same, because in 5 years' time or even in 2 years' time, we're going to have another shock, and the government is again going to have to bring medicine to ease the pain. I really want to see a budget that focuses on building true resilience at the individual and household level. And that means looking at how we provide real employment and jobs for our people so that they can take care of themselves and their households. And for me, that's a fundamental issue that I have not seen addressed here. And I feel as if there's going to be a shock again in a year, in 2 years' time, and we're going to need the government to step in to do things. Again, this cannot continue. We need to have budgets that start to build real resilience from the ground up.
I want to remind you that Inside the Budget brought to you the kind compliments of the Science and Technology Festival on Tuesday, March 24 from 9:30 at the Queen's Park main stage. Now, based on what Justin has just said, lady and gentlemen, he thinks that the budget might be perhaps a little too friendly, and he's worried about that implementation actually bringing the relief it's supposed to do. Let's get a discussion on that, Kristin, first of all. Do you agree with that, and do you think that there is a general concern that that could indeed happen?
Well, I understood from Mr. Ram that it's not just about easing the pain. Even if these measures are successful, I think the concern he was expressing is that it does not necessarily provide long-term resilience for individuals. And I would imagine he's also speaking particularly to those who may be low income and also some middle income earners. But I do think we have to look at everything in a broad view. And it's important to consider not just the initiatives in here, but the initiatives that have been implemented before, broader considerations expressed in the estimates in terms of the transformation of the educational system, efforts that are being made, it seems, to address how businesses operate, making individuals more equipped to run their own businesses, to be able to have better financial literacy, which would allow them to be able to take care of themselves and their families. And I don't think that this budget was intended to address those things, but has to be considered in the context of those existing frameworks and efforts that are being put in place.
You agree with that, Paul?
Well, I would. So it's a mixed bag, right? The government needed to respond and provide a cushion for the citizens of Barbados, and they have to get this balance between providing relief and the transformation of our economy, which I guess things like GIGA will speak to, right? And we need to understand a little more about that. But the main task for us would be, how do you provide relief and cushion and try to manage the cost of living? And when you talk about the cost of living, you need to also speak about the cost of doing business in Barbados, because that is part of the cost of living mix. And we have to, not you, but I think the whole of society, both public and private sectors, need to work towards a transformation agenda. And one of the things, in business that we do pretty well at is when you have a strategy, so government has a strategy, and for me, that strategy should be guided by a framework that, in the same way I have to account on a quarterly basis to a board or an executive around how I use resources allocated to the business I lead, we should hold government in the same manner. And on the transformation agenda, when we speak to policies and proposals, well, let's see how those are translated in a real way that then government on a quarterly basis turn up and account to the citizenship of Barbados.
And having said that, based on what Justin said, and based on the small and medium enterprises, which of course Paul to a less extent would represent, but ICAB will more speak to that. Based upon that, is there an intertwining of the budget, and can SMEs resonate with that then?
Yeah, I believe they can, because there were some direct measures as it relates to SMEs. Certainly, extending the threshold for VAT now to, I think, 350,000. I think that within itself will lessen the administrative burdens for small and medium-sized entities, and certainly too, even on the regulator side, it would also lessen the administrative burden too. So I think also as it relates to access to finance as well, some indicators there as it relates to the micro businesses now. The trust loan moving from 10,000 to 20,000. I think within the sector you would normally see there's it's a burden to access that level of finance. So there are some measures there. What I've been hearing, from the panel also, is the whole concept of policy intention and implementation, versus implementation, and that is a real topic that we can discuss, because to be honest with you, I think that any policy that you are intending to roll out, it must be also timely. The relevant parties must have the necessary guidance to adopt the policy so it can be effective. And I think sometimes, especially when you look in the past, I think sometimes that could be where government has say not followed through. And that is something that ICAB within itself will continue to monitor, because it really does cause more frustration than you would like when you don't have the requisite implementation in a timely manner.
Shawn, based on what he's also saying, the government did say quite a few of their measures are 3-month packages. The electricity relief is a 3-month package, and there are a couple others that also for a 3-month period. Does that give them a chance not only to view how the Gulf War is going, but also to see if Barbadians would indeed seriously need this help only for that period, and then they can stand on their own 2 feet? How do you see that 3-month buffer that's given on a number of proposals?
The way I look at that 3 months is that I think it's the former, where government is looking at how things develop internationally, particularly in Iran.
Right.
Because you would note that one of the scenarios Mr. Shawn mentioned was oil prices increasing to between $150 per barrel US.
To almost 200.
Exactly so. And when he was speaking, oil prices were just above 106 US dollars per barrel. So I think that 3 months is really and truly to see how things develop in the international arena. And then, depending on how things develop there, you could offer additional assistance. But of course, how much assistance is enough and how much can government offer, given its fiscal wherewithal at this point in time, considering too that you would note that Mr. Shawn did indicate that there's a $500 million adjustment in the estimates.
Correct.
They have reduced the revenue expectation in terms of corporation tax by $200 million, and they're also cutting spending by $300 million. So those issues are considerations that government will be thinking about going forward, certainly within the next 3 months and beyond that.
Can I interject?
Sure. You can interject. We also have a question. It's for anyone on the panel, but this quick question. Someone here is saying that, good evening to the panel, the Prime Minister of Antigua, Gaston Brown, did something similar just days ago. Do you think that that impacted upon what Minister Ryan Strawn did? Of course, that person's alluding to the fact that I think the government of Antigua did offer a buffer to cap the cost of fuel for a particular period, even if it was to go up. So that's a question that anyone in the panel can take. Do you think that that was a follow-on?
I would just provide some context first. So what you're talking about is really hedging.
Right.
So we in the finance community and even some members in the private sector, that is not an idea that was not out there before, actually. And the thing about it is that sometimes in a crisis, we do things that, in essence, can have benefit, and it's really sometimes it's unfortunate, but sometimes we can learn from certain things, even in a crisis. So, what I would say too, as it relates to the hedge, that is something that in the financial community, that is something that can add benefit because it really locks you in at a price where that you can, kind of shield yourself from certain external shocks. So if you ask some members of the business community, they would say that this hedge is something that should have been done or could have been done even before, outside of the crisis, right? So my real final point is that you don't quarrel over spilled milk, right? In terms of we've not done it before, but now we can see the benefit of something like that. It may be wise to put it into your arsenal as a measure that could have benefit going forward.
Justin, you want to make a point. I want to also bring in Justin as well and ask him to complement that.
Right, so just wanted clarity on it. Is it that this hedging that they've done now, this is the first time any government in Barbados has ever done that?
Yes, so it was proposed before.
Yeah.
So again, some of the conversations we would have had as a private sector with government. I'm aware that it was proposed before. So hedging is a risk management tool.
Sure. Yes.
And it's one of the
And it's something that the BCCI supports as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
But I mean, once you are in the business of trading in oil and depending on the shocks that can happen, you need to hedge. There's certain risks that you need to hedge against, right? Mm-hmm. So it's just one of the risk management tools that businesses use.
Let's go to Justin. Justin, the whole factor of hedging, that conversation continues to come up several times. You did say that you believe that government should have had perhaps a bit more intricate say, but the factor of hedging, your thoughts on that, Justin Ram? She's getting calls already.
Okay. Well, I think, of course, it's an important tool that any entity that can do it, and including a government, should perhaps engage in doing this. It's probably taken too long for us to do it. But again, I just want to reiterate my earlier point where I'm not saying that government must not support initiatives that I guess provide some relief to the cost of living. I guess what I am really saying is that I want to see a budget whereby the headlines are not about those things, but really about the transformation agenda so that these types of micro initiatives, as it were, are not required again in the future. It's not going to happen in 2, 3, or 5 years. It's going to take maybe 10, 15 years. But we need to start saying that. I'd love to see the headline in Nation newspaper saying, budget for real transformation to build resilience from the individual and household level go up. Because ultimately, I believe that a lot of the issues that we have in Barbados, as well as across the Caribbean, is simply because too many of our people do not have good enough jobs, do not have enough income. And so whenever there is a crisis, and if you can look at it, we're probably having crises every year. Is it that we're going to expect the government to always step in and do this type of initiative to support household consumption? Shouldn't it not be the responsibility of all of us with the government providing the rails to do it, that we build a transformational economy whereby people can now have income to be resilient on their own? Because there's going to come a time where we have to stop doing this, because then the debt to GDP ratio will again rise if we continue to always have to step in to help people to consume. We need to provide a way to have people being resilient on their own. I think that's a real transformation agenda, and that's the headline that I'd like to see in the Nation newspapers from a budget government.
I want to remind you that Inside the Budget brought to you in association with the Science and Technology Festival, Tuesday 24th of March from 9:30 a.m. at the Queen's Park Main Stage, Bridgetown. The future starts here. Admission free, presented by the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology in association with the Ministry of Educational Transformation and VOB 92.9 FM. Question coming for both Paul and Kristin is coming from someone in the energy sector. They're saying hedging is good when oil prices are high, but when the price drops, look out for the outcry from the same people that supported the hedging. You too, take that one.
Right. That is actually something that I contemplated when I saw it, because it can have the benefit of prices being high and therefore you get a lower benefit. But if they drop, let's say this war ends tomorrow, right? Then we're stuck at that price. But I think that's the benefit of only doing it for 3 months.
Right, okay.
Right? I think it's a reasonable enough period for people to be able to manage an increase up to that particular point, and then to give the government time to make adjustments. If they had locked it in for 6 months, I think we would certainly have a bigger problem. But that's a reasonable period of time to observe what's happening. And especially having seen how Donald Trump has managed different wars and issues with other countries, things can start and end very quickly. So that 3-month period may be a reasonable period for us to be able to assess, and that, to me, would make the hedging approach reasonable.
You agree with that, Paul?
Yes, and I mean, hedging is a financial instrument, right? Or application. So, and financial transactions tend to have an upside, and it can also have a downside. So we're not saying that hedging is the cure of it all, but it is a risk management mechanism to help with the stabilization of prices.
It allows you to plan because you know that this is the maximum that it's going to be at.
Yes, there you go.
You know, so you can plan for that 3-month period and then make adjustments based on what else you see.
Yes, and just to add, just quickly, just to finish the point, it is not guessing. You know, that is a point that you must also say. It's also risk evaluation, so it's a process to it, right? So there are factors that go into it, as Paul mentioned, the risk management, but there's also risk assessment, there's modeling, there's a whole set of factors that go into making what we would term an informed decision.
I want to ask this to you and also to the economists. The reverse tax credit, this is a question coming. They're asking for this to be broken down. For the income year 2025, the income limit for the revenue tax credit will increase from $25,000 to $35,000 per annum persons in this band will receive a reverse tax credit of $750. Can you break that down for us as an accountant? And this question actually was proposed to Justin, but can you break that down before we get asked Justin to actually look at that as well from an economic perspective?
So you do see the band. So those persons who make income up to that certain amount will be certainly entitled to some money back when they do apply for it. It's as simple as that. As you know, I don't think. So again, as I said, you have
25,000 to 35,000. That's in the lower income bracket. That's
Right.
almost minimum wage bracket.
Right. So those persons will be eligible to the requisite tax
That's
credit.
outside of
That's-
Kristin Turton's
That
bracket.
that is above minimum wage, certainly. Minimum wage is below
in the,
25,000.
the low to middle.
Low to middle. The next question, tax break for middle income earners. From income year 2026, the personal income tax rate for individuals earning between $25,000 and $75,000 will be reduced from 12.5% to 11.5%, which is a 1%, at a cost of $16.4 million. And for those earning above $75,000, from 28.5% to 27.5%, at a cost to the government at $9.7 million. Shawn, you like to break down these things in your Business Mondays. How would you assess that? Is it a good move, or many people won't perhaps notice it on their bank books?
You mean the income tax?
Yes, the income tax.
ease? Well, I'm not a tax expert. That would be my friend from ICAB, but incomes have been under pressure. We keep hearing the middle class is under pressure. Some people argue that the middle class has been decimated, is no longer middle class. So the lower income groups and the middle class have been crying out for some ease for some time now. And I think that was just part of the overall package of ease that the Minister of Finance announced yesterday. So I take it as part of the overall thing as opposed to just extracting that.
Right. Yes.
Oh, I could provide some context for
Please
you
do.
if you want. So we have you just mentioned the reduction in tax. What you would call that is the middle income bracket.
Yeah.
And given the span of the band, it's a broad measure, so it would encompass a lot of the middle income class, right? And if you want to put some numbers to it, so if you had a person who is making $100,000 in 2024, income year 2025, they would have to pay tax about $93,000, close to 94. In financial year 2025, given the reduction in tax, that person now will get a net benefit really of about $3,400, right? So you can see the difference there. So you would, that person in 2025 with the reduction in tax would have $3,500 more to spend, So it is a measure that gives some level of relief. So it just puts in some numbers to it.
Another question here come in. This one I'll perhaps let Justin Ram take this. This is the $1,200 support for pensioners. Effective April 1st, pensioners with an income below $50,000 per year will receive a cost of living cash credit of $100 per month for a year, which equates to $1,200 per year. This wouldn't perhaps this would not impact a lot, I would say, Justin, on the economy. I mean, it's not a lot of money, but at the same time, it is still an intent to show that the government is trying to do something for pensioners. How do you view that $1,200 support for pensioners?
Well, any support for pensioners, because those are people in society whose incomes are quite fixed, I think is actually quite welcome. Although it is only $100 per month, I'm pretty sure that $100 would go a long way for anyone who is in that particular income bracket and is a pensioner. And of course, is within that overall cachet of having a fixed income, as it were. So I think, so certainly I am all in favor of this. But if I also just touch back on some of the earlier discussions on the reverse tax credit and of course the reduction in income tax, I think that the time has come for us to also consider at what bracket of income do we really want to have people paying income tax? And what type of taxes are really going to help us to move the economy forward and to really benefit those on the ground? I feel as if income tax for certain categories of persons, and I consider those who are now getting some income tax reduction in the middle income segment, do we really want to be taxing them as heavily as we are now? Can we find some other way for them to contribute to the national treasury via maybe on consumption, allowing them to decide how they pay their taxes on perhaps some types of services that they might, rather than on their incomes. I have done work in some of the other jurisdictions across the Caribbean, and some of those jurisdictions have no income tax at all, and they have taxes perhaps on consumption. And that has really improved, I would say, the overall quality of life and standard of living for many people there, because you then have most of your income coming to you, if not all of it, and you can then decide how you want to spend that and invest that, and how indeed you want to consume that, and thereby deciding how much of your income you want to pay in taxes. I think the time has come for us to start looking at some of these things, because there are many people in the Barbadian economy who are earning incomes who I honestly think should not be paying income tax at all. I think the time has come for us to start having that particular debate.
You agree with that, Paul?
Yes. And I say yes because I actually have seen the model that Justin spoke to work in the Caribbean context, right? My thinking is allow the individual to decide and how they will spend the disposable income. And you can do it in phases. There are some territories that have no income tax across all bands. But I think we can actually do it in on a phase basis, where we give relief to those that you're currently giving tax credits to, and have them determine the services they buy, the goods and services they buy, and you tax them at that level. I think you might get some equity in the system as well, because I would argue that I think the last figure I heard was around, let me put out 27-28% of those working pay income tax, right? So the majority of people that earn don't pay income tax, and therefore, to me, it's not a fair deal. Let's be honest.
Right.
If you were to go to every household in Barbados and say to them, only about 27, let's go to 30%. Let's go to 40% of the people in Barbados that are earning, paying income tax. Most of the people, it would appear, don't pay income tax. So I think we need to have a better approach. And Justin, for me, that goes into transformation. Some of the things that we really need to take on head on and deal with once and for all in terms of how we really restructure, our economy, right? Because in some cases, and I don't want to sound or come over insensitive, but it goes back to the comments the Economist made around how do we help people help themselves.
Yeah.
So that I think we will build a stronger country, a more productive country, a more efficient country if we can get more people helping themselves in a meaningful way, and whether it's through financial literacy programs and all the other educational transformative work that is being done now, how we get everybody up to speed so that they can actually look after themselves.
I do have a question though. So
Yeah.
in terms of, you said that perhaps let's say it's 30%
Yeah.
who pay income tax. Is it that only 30% actually pay, or are you saying only 30% have income that is taxable?
Very, very
Very
good
good
question.
question.
I do not work for Brass, so
Right.
I think
Perhaps Damian might be able to explain that.
But I'm asking
No?
the question because one has to do with the income levels of people and those who meet the threshold to pay, and the other one has to do with the enforceability of income tax, which it would seem it may be more difficult to do than a consumption tax, which targets where you have businesses collect for you. That was just my query.
yeah, it might be more enforceability.
Shawn, is that something that you can break down for the panel and indeed for those listening and watching?
In terms of,
Yeah, in terms of the question that Kristin posed regarding, you want to break that down for Shawn, explain to Shawn?
So my query was just about whether the comment that was being made was speaking to the ability of government to collect taxes from people who are duty bound to pay it, and the fact that they're not very successful in doing it because only 30% of the people are paying, versus the system itself with different allowances and so on, only having 30% of the people being subject to tax. Because that makes a big difference in terms of why a government might make a shift to something like full indirect taxation. So that's what I was querying.
But if you think about that, and just logically, if you can change your tax system where you get most people or society paying for goods and services and their taxes associated with those goods and services, you may and most likely will collect more tax than the direct taxation system on incomes,
Yeah.
right? So I think it's from that basis that I'm speaking to, really. How do we transform and become a more efficient society when it comes to the costs associated with education, medical care? So again, it is like the pooling effect, where you pool and the pool, look after the interests of those that need support from the pool, as opposed to targeted individuals within a small capture segment.
That could help with
Actually,
economic activity
Justin
too.
Brown was actually alluding to that. Justin, were you alluding to that? Was that the point that you were alluding to earlier that Paul is mentioning?
Yes, because if you look at this, so if I just answer Kristin's question, there's a combination of what's happening here. Is that there are many people who are not earning enough to pay income taxes, but then you also have, if I'm allowed to say so, some tax evasion going on at high income levels, right? I think, and the reason why this can happen is because income tax is very difficult to administer, and of course to get people to adhere to it. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is there comes a point in time, and I think my colleague from the chamber is also alluding to this, that perhaps it might be better for us to just have a simple sales tax. And here I'm advocating for the removal of VAT, if I'm not, if I'm allowed to say that. Have a simple sales tax of maybe 5% on everything, and I'm pretty sure that that would go well for most people. It would be really good for government, for the private sector as well, because it would remove a lot of administrative burdens of doing VAT returns and waiting for your money to then be paid via the government. But there's another issue around income tax. At a low income level, if you are moving from a situation where you're not paying income tax, and then if you get a raise and you start paying income tax, there is not much incentive for you to now want to be more productive and to earn income. Why not just stay at a level where I'm not paying any income tax at all? So I'm saying is that when you move to a situation where you then move into a category where you're paying income taxes, there can actually be this disincentive for greater productivity gains. I think these are also some of the things that I'm trying to allude to, that it's time for us to now consider moving away from income tax and moving towards perhaps a system where we are reliant more on consumption taxes, and perhaps to some extent on property taxes. Um, and that is where I think a lot of the burden can be placed on us to raise our fiscal revenues.
Sounds good from an economist perspective. From a accountant perspective, is that something that's doable? Is it as easy as just saying that to help ease
certainly it's not as easy as saying that, because we also need money to provide for social services and the like.
And the estimates, which are over $6 billion, I believe it
right.
was.
So what I say though is the principle. I will stick to this principle, and I think it is one that would address both sides, right? If you reduce the taxation and simplify it, at the end of the day, there still needs to be some level of administration. And if your administration is not efficient, you will still have some problems in collecting, So what I will go more principally to say, there's room even in our tax administration system now that could be enhanced, right? There could be, certainty in terms of guidance, in terms of how to do things, so that the businesses will be able to plan. Because what you find is that, I think it was alluded to, is that sometimes when you have uncertainty in what to do, you tend to get frustrated. Yeah. And when you get frustrated, then it is when you then evade or try to avoid it, right? So generally speaking, I think tax revenues in terms of collections, if you look at our economic outlook, really has increased, right?
It has, yes.
It has increased, right? So the idea is that it can, if we get to a situation where we are more efficient, so then our tax base could even be broadened because persons find it as something easy to do. Those revenues could also increase. And obviously, those things and government funds also provide the standard of living and the health services and so forth that we tend to like within this country called Barbados.
All right, this is Inside the Budget, brought to you with the kind compliments of the Science and Technology Festival on the 24th of March. It's Tuesday, 9:30 a.m. at Queen's Park Main Stage, Bridgetown. The future starts here. Admission is free, presented by the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology in association with the Ministry of Educational Transformation and VOB 92.9 FM. Just in case you're listening and not watching, with us, noted economist Justin Ram, President of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Paul Inniss, along with the head of ICAB, Damian, Skeete, the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, and Kristin, Turton, attorney at law, and our correspondent from the nation, Mr. Shawn Cumberbatch. Questions coming in, you can continue to send them at 826-5827. That's 826-5827. And this question is dealing with the cash grant for children. This lady says she wants it explained. Shawn, I might give you a chance to do this, or perhaps Kristin. The multi-birth cash grant, $300 per month for twins up to age 5, $600 per month for triplets and more up to age 5. The Barbados Republic Child Wealth Fund, $5,000 in trust per child born after November 30th, 2021. The just concluded estimates have set aside $52.1 million to cover these amounts. It is estimated to cost between $10 to $12 million per year going forward. I put that to the panel. Perhaps the person who has children, the lady who has children.
Yes, and who would be happy to have the benefit of that for one of my children. First of all, in terms of the multiple births, I do think the nature of that is just simply a cash grant. If you have multiple children in one birth, so you have twins, you have triplets, quadruplets, you will be able to get a specific grant, $300 per month, I believe, for twins, and $600 per month for
$300 per month for twins up to age 5.
Yes.
$600 per month for triplets.
Yes.
Up to age 5 as well.
And above.
And
in
above.
Terms of births.
And above. Yeah.
And that is, to my mind, that is some form of ease, because you do not plan to have multiple births. That is just a biological result. And therefore, there's a financial burden that might not have been anticipated, like what you might consider if you just had a single child.
Yeah.
And I think providing that element of relief is a positive. But the question is, how does one claim that benefit what are the administrative processes that will be imposed to implement it, and was consideration or can consideration be given to other vulnerable people, for example, people who might have children who are premature,
Right.
who may have certain health issues, or who need specialized food and so on.
Well,
who
the
can
minister
benefit from
did,
that.
he was kind of emotional, and he did open to his personal side where his son is autistic.
Yeah.
And I think he spoke a little bit about that.
Well,
and
that's a special
children
needs,
with special
right?
needs as well.
So children with special needs, but that is not necessarily the same thing as a person a baby that was just premature, who may not have special needs in that sense. They may not fall into that category, but because of how they were born, there may be additional expenses to allow them to then thrive at the level of a child that went full term. So those are some of the things that I was wondering if at some point in the future that can be considered. Another, in terms of the Republic Child Wealth Fund, I think that is another potential positive approach, because it is not simply just $5,000 that is a grant that's being given to people. It is something which, and of course the details will dictate the success of it, but the concept of it is the investment of money for the benefit of a child. That $5,000 invested today is expected to grow based on the manner in which it is invested by this government entity that is charged with that responsibility. And the ability of parents at all levels to be able to contribute whatever sum they want to that, so that can grow through their input as well. Now, it is limited in its application, because they're not saying that when you become 18, we're just going to give you, for example, whatever the sum is at $20,000. You have to be applying it to a particular purpose. And it was interesting that during the elections, when speaking about the purposes, there was reference to medical emergency, education, purchase of your first home or property, all very good things, but in the budget, I did not hear any reference to healthcare. So what I am keen to see is the legislative framework that they have promised to bring very soon for this, because that will dictate the manner in which it can be accessed. It will dictate the manner in which it will be distributed, circumstances in which someone may not receive it, what should happen if, for example, a person reaches the age 25, it has not been accessed, but they don't have any ability to access it in any of these designated purposes. What happens to that money? Where does it go? You know, those are questions that we need to have answered.
Paul, all things that the BCCI, I hope, might want to perhaps address at their next meeting, because it is something that is on the minds of a lot of Barbadians, even those with or without kids, because they want to know about the money that's going to be invested, $10 to $12 billion.
Well, the first question I had was, what is the intent, right? So I think given that we have a population growth issue, that was my first thought, right?
Incentive.
Here's an incentive, similar to other countries do it in different ways. But the other side of it was providing consideration, I would say, for those that unexpectedly end up with twins and triplets. But I read it from the perspective of don't think twice if you want to procreate and repopulate the earth. The government will provide some level of assistance.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, Paul, because that same thought did cross my mind. And when you look at the other measures that have been introduced in recent times, you see the parental leave bill,
Yes.
where you have paternity leave introduced now and maternity leave extended. We add this measure in terms of the cash grant, the Republic Child Wealth Fund. So the question in a member of the public's mind is are all of these things intended to encourage or incentivize people to get children, given the population challenges which are so well documented?
This is certainly something the government spoke about. They have spoken about, in terms of their national population growth policy, the idea of providing financial incentives for people to have children. I don't think, though, that, for example, that the particular ones mentioned here are really will incentivize people to have children. And I therefore don't think that's necessarily the intention. I think it's more a question of relief, and that any intention to incentivize will come later. The reason I say that is because Multiple births, you don't plan those. So that you're not going to be incentivized because you don't assume, unless you come from a family with twins, that you're going to have them.
Yeah.
The growth fund, that isn't incentivizing me. I don't get the money. And if I did, I have to wait 20 years. So that's not incentivizing somebody today to have children tomorrow, right? So I think there are other incentives that, in theory, they may have in the pipeline, but they're putting other things in place, I would imagine. But these things here, you know, I don't think they're intended to be incentives, and even if they were, they would be very effective.
So you're seeing those as falling under the big umbrella of cost of living?
Yes, I
really?
think so. And I think and from a political perspective, it just sounds good, right? It sounds good, it looks good, you know, people can feel good about it. And in terms of the Republic Child Wealth Fund, I think it fits into a wider discussion about changing the mindset of people in terms of long-term versus short-term. Saying to somebody that your child is going to get something in 18 years, for a person who's accustomed to just figuring out how to survive, that is something that causes you to think differently. When you think about, okay, so now I have to think about my child, I want my child to go to university, I want them to have access to certain things. I am going to take my money and add to what the government has put forward. That is a change in how Barbadians think about money. And it's consistent then with the Financial Literacy Action Task Force that has been implemented, the process of having that be instituted in schools so that then the same child who benefits from that at age 18 would already have had financial literacy training all through school. It's just one big package.
I want to put that question to the $10 to $12 million per year. I just want a quick comment from Justin and from Damian, a quick question about how the $10 to $12 million a year would impact the average Joe Bloke who don't have children, but they are being now asked to carry that in terms of a tax perspective. A quick thought from you on that, Justin, and a quick from you on Damian, and then we have a number of questions from the audience. Go ahead, Justin.
Well, very quickly, I think any initiative that supports children in our society is welcome. And there is enough research that shows that if we invest in our children, certainly from the ages of 3 to 5, the first 5 years of a child's life, that can be a huge determinant for the outcome of that particular adult. So anything like this, I welcome. I guess the only thing I would like to say is that, like Kristin is saying, I want to know what is the coherence in this policy? What is this meant to do? And I hope that it is really meant to support families and to support children, and not necessarily about population growth, because the decline in population, which is estimated to be about 27% by 2100, this type of incentive will not deal with reversing that. And we need to have other measures in place. But to say, I think if I'm a taxpayer in Barbados, and I know that my taxpayer dollars are going towards the support of children in society, I don't think there's any taxpayer that is going to make a fuss about that.
$1 billion, a fair price to pay?
It's a good investment in the future. I think that is what it is, and certainly what I would say too, and if I speak through the lens of an accountant, if you want to say, is that
yes.
I think with any policy, I think there need to be good administration of it, and it should be good transparency within it as well, and in terms of its implementation, which because the reason we are discussing it now is because we don't know exactly how, you know, the full gamut of it, right? The devil is in the details, as
so we need to give it a 12-month period or so. Yeah. All right, we have two questions. One is a question that's directed to the BCCI, and this one, anyone can take this one. It says, can someone on the panel please clarify the relief granted to persons importing items for personal use? Is it that any item, example, a television, costed more than $200 will be charged duty on VAT on the cost of the TV only, not including freight and insurance charges? Is that, who wants to take that question? Do you understand the question, first of all? Can someone on the panel clarify the relief grant to persons importing items for personal use? Is it that any item, example, a television, costed more than $200 will be charged duty and VAT on the cost of the TV only, not included freight and insurance charges?
Right. So if I understand, I think there's they raised the de minimis level of things that you can import, personal stuff.
Right.
that
I
you
heard
can
Jeremy
import.
Stephen did say that.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think it was, I can't remember, $60. I think it is now increased, right? So to
Yes.
150. So therefore, once you buy an item, say from outside, it normally attracts, if it was over that level, import duty, and it would also attract VAT. But if it is under that, it would attract nothing. And then there's another band. If it is between, I think, 150 and
a cent to 199.
and to 199, then it would attract just the VAT. But then if it is over that, it would attract both the customs duty and VAT.
Good. So I hope that answers your question. We're saying there, thank you so much for that. Goods imported for personal use through registered couriers. Tax-free amount raised from $60 to $150, from $150 to $199.99. Duty-free and only VAT payable, anything over $200 in value. Customs duty and VAT apply. There will be a $500 fine for false declarations or under invoicing. I don't think anyone does that. This question for you, Paul. It says, a lot has been said in the budget about incentives for small and medium enterprises, but one of the biggest problems that we have in Barbados is the cost and the ease in doing business. It continues to be red tape-ish, the person says, and a major headache. We were talking about this before the program started.
Yes.
Did the budget relate to anything? I mean, yes, we're seeing some monies coming in for small businesses to get loans, but what about the ease of doing business in Barbados?
Right, so I think the budget in terms of the extension of the digitalization and business process reengineering credit is one of the initiatives that would support I would say, the ease of doing business, becoming more efficient. But the ease of doing business in Barbados has a lot to do with the ecosystem, both in government sector as well as the private sector. Generally in Barbados, all of us need to, I would say, rethink, reimagine how we do business in Barbados. And the ease or the difficulties associated in doing business in Barbados has a nexus to the cost of doing business in Barbados. So when we complain about the cost of doing business or the cost of living, a lot of it has to do with the inefficiencies, the frictions within the system, the bureaucracies within the systems, and making things that could be simple complex. I think there's an opportunity, and government has started on a journey of transforming aspects of the government service. So we can think of KIPO, which is now known as Business Barbados.
Yes.
That has started that journey, and they're on their way of digitizing, but also transforming business registration and the whole ecosystem around doing business in Barbados. So if you were to think about it from a business perspective, if we can actually establish and create a system where there's interconnectivity across the government functions. So let's be simple. You need to register business.
Yeah.
You need to register with NIS. You need to register with BRA. Which others I need to do, right? So say
you start with Business Barbados first.
Yes. So say there are 5 agencies you need to. Why should I have to leave physically?
Yeah.
Leave one door, get in my car, go somewhere else. When I finish there, get in my car, go somewhere else, and I spend 2 or 3 days just trying to navigate the registration of a business in Barbados.
It's a headache.
It is just not.
And that's what Justin Ram was
acceptable.
pointing out too about
transformation.
So we need and quote unquote tax evasion, because what happens there is that when you don't register, you pick up a lot of money, but do you declare it? Is that what you were referring to, Justin?
Yes, of course, and that's what I'm saying. And if I'm just going to add a little bit to what is being said there, what we're really trying to advocate for here is a real transformation in this economy, which is to say that we want to either produce more locally or add more value locally, and we need to have some coherence around that. And I guess the reason why I keep harping on this is that once you do this and people can now take care of themselves because now we're producing more and we have better paying jobs, we have less need for social interventions from the government and therefore less need for some of these cost of living interventions in an annual budget. And I guess part of this whole initiative is, of course, improving the doing business environment so that we can produce more locally or add more value locally. And one concern I have with the improvements in, I guess, the duties for some of these products that are going to be imported is that coherent with a transformation policy that really wants us to produce more, add more value at home. And I think this is where I tend to have this sort of cognitive dissonance, as it were. I'm trying to understand how does all of this move us in a direction of transformation that the government has indicated it wants to do, but yet at the same time, I'm seeing policies that they are not noticing, but are contradictory to that. And this is, I think, what I want us to start focusing on. What's the real transformation agenda? How we improve the business environment, how we add more value at home and produce more so that our people have better paying jobs and we don't have the need for governments to intervene in a cost of living crisis because our people do have the ability to take care of themselves. That's the sort of discussion that I think we want to really have. It comes back again to the tax structure of the economy as well. If we're moving towards a system that allows us to pay taxes on what we consume, then if you think about it, because we don't have the need for those social interventions, then that becomes a moot point, as it were. And
Kristin,
that's the triangle.
I see they want to comment on what he's saying.
Yes, in relation to just a few points. The first thing in terms of the transformation is that I understand that what Paul was speaking about is effectively what Business Barbados is intending to do.
One-stop shop.
One-stop shop in terms of not that they are the ones administering NAS, for example, but that they're supposed to be in a position to facilitate that process all in one place, in one environment. Then there are other aspects of what the government is planning. I think the challenge, though, is the communication is not there. No. So much of what I know, for example, about what Business Barbados intends to do would come from my role on the Bar Council and different meetings and symposia that I would have attended where they said to select groups, this is what we are doing, but which hasn't really been made known to the public in terms of what is Business Barbados just a rebranded CAIPO? And it's not supposed to be. Yeah. The entire structure and service delivery are supposed to be different.
And then you also have to ask if people have faith in the whole space in terms of is there enough space for people to do everything at a one-stop shop? You go to these places and you spend a half an hour doing one simple thing. Mm-hmm. You're not going to do three things. You'll be there for half of the day.
But the thing is, the structure that they have, they're actually supposed to be transforming.
And the website is still called CAIPO. It's not called Business Barbados.
So there are things that they're building out, but nobody knows what they are. So it is not helpful when you have ideas, when you make these broad statements, but when you don't provide people with details and you don't have a consistent flow of information saying this is where we are, this is what we're doing. And I think that's where, in many respects, this government falls down. Because I think they have many good ideas. And I think that they have a transformative concept in many areas. And they're trying to do so many things all at once, and nobody knows how they're interconnected. And it's only if you're paying attention to everything that you will understand. But the average person is paying attention to one thing here or there. They don't know how things are interconnected. And because of that, they don't have faith that there is any transformation. Yeah. If they don't have faith, they can't participate in the process, and then that prevents it from being effective.
Damian?
I just want to make one more point in terms of what he did say, though, in terms of the economic policies. So you can look at one policy and you can say, why are we reducing, for example, customs and duties on importing? Isn't that going to make it more likely that people import more? But I do think that in order for us to have local production increase, that is not something that can happen tomorrow. That requires investment. And that's why when you look at the broader policies that the government has expressed, and whether you believe they will be successful or not, the point is that they are expressing policies that say we are investing now for a long-term benefit. But Barbadians can't wait for that benefit to start.
No.
Barbadians need relief today. They need to be able to figure out how they're going to function today. And if that is what happens, then you have to do things like reducing the cost of importing things today so that they can survive, right? That's different from saying, well, you can't do that and want people to invest in local things. What they can do, which as I said they don't do very well, is communicate better about that to the people.
Damian?
All relevant points that has been made, to be honest, but I would just give from the perspective of ICAB and some of the constituents, in terms of the ease of doing business. I think it's a fundamental issue as it relates, within the whole conversation of sustainability. It even goes there. So therefore, if you want to be attractive to foreign direct investment and so forth, which helps you gain that foreign exchange, you certainly have to, we can say in Barbados, get your house in order in terms of certain things. And I believe that, with Business Barbados, I think we are, in the community, as the accounting community, we are invested in the success of something like that, because the success of something like Business Barbados, where you have business facilitation, it will only do benefit for the country. And we have been integral in terms of having the conversations already, and I'm hoping that we will continue to be involved, especially in the processes, so that we fit for purpose. But just making that point, if we want to be sustainable as a country, we can't just depend certainly on tourism. We have to be diversified. Foreign direct investment, SME growth, creative economy, agriculture, those are the things that make us sustainable and absorb the shocks of any external matters.
Shawn, I want to get your thoughts on that. Can I get your thoughts and opinion on that?
Yes, I agree. And that goes back to the whole question of which Economist Mr. Ram was speaking about. One of the things he mentioned was the importance of building resilience. The economy relies heavily on tourism, as everyone in Barbados knows.
Yeah.
And
some say too heavily.
So it's accepted that there's a need to diversify the economy. We have seen some effort in terms of renewable energy, but that has had its hiccups, one of them being storage of renewable energy, and that is being gone through now in terms of batteries being procured, etc.
Yeah.
We did see some measures in terms of agriculture in the budget, and I think agriculture is an area that can help twofold. Produce more at home, reduces the need to import, and in reducing the need to import, you save more foreign exchange there. So it's a balancing out really in terms of those areas. When was the last time you heard anything about really in terms of the medicinal cannabis industry? Of course, we know the issues there in terms of the financial sector and being able to bank the revenue from the medicinal cannabis industry. So we know the need for economic diversification. We know some of the areas that we can pursue, but still there are some challenges there that I think have stalled progress. But it's unquestionable that we need to do that. And it's not, to me, it's not a question of moving away from tourism.
Yeah.
It's a question of building on tourism, and even within tourism, there's an opportunity to diversify as well. Certainly from the point of view of source markets, where you get your tourists from, etc.
Different purposes, things like sports tourism are things that we don't.
Yeah, medical tourism, education.
Someone here is asking us to discuss the topic of the rental cars. We're going to get to that. Just want to remind you that Inside the Budget brought to you in association with the Science and Technology Festival on Tuesday, the 24th of March, from 9:30 a.m. at the Queen's Park main stage in Bridgetown. The future starts here. Admission is free. Presented by the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology in association with the Ministry of Educational Transformation and, of course, right here on VOB 92.9 FM. And with us today, of course, live on VOB 92.9 FM and on VOB on YouTube, we have noted economist Kristin Ram, President of the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, Paul Inniss, And we also happy to have Damian Skeete, president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Barbados, the nation's Shawn, Cumberbatch, and Brasstacks moderator and attorney at law, Kristin Turton, here with us on the panel. Now, rental car companies, they are getting somewhat of an ease as well. In fact, we heard about that $10 levy, which was criticized quite heavily last year. That conversation has somewhat been muted. I believe that cost would have come down. And then there's also, for those who are getting EVs and hybrids, there's also something there for you, which is something that has been mooted for the last couple of years. Rental car companies, I put that to the panel. Justin, let me start with you. Any person who has a rental car company will be happy to note that they're getting what, less 10%, I believe. How do you look at that measure for rental car companies? Some people believe in Barbados there are too many of them. Some of the rental car companies you call in high season, they're saying they have no cars. Is this going to benefit and encourage people to continue their rental car companies?
I think so. Look, I welcome it because it's an important, I guess, subsidiary of our tourism industry, and so it leads to this sort of feedback loop within the economy. But I guess in many ways, I would like to see this sort of incentive extended to other areas whereby we can have other loops back into the tourism economy. For example, in agriculture, and again, it comes back to this whole notion of what the transformation that we need to see. And if I just want to pick up a point that Kristin said, where she was saying she thinks that it's not whether we can transform the economy and then also have a reduction in import taxes to import things now. I think that both of those things are not coherent. If we want to transform this economy and have a greater level of output in terms of, let's say, agriculture, so that more of what we consume is produced locally, not only by us who live in Barbados, but also by tourists who visit. Those people who are staying in our hotels are also now consuming more of what we produce locally. Then we have to be steadfast in supporting that type of initiative rather than what I'm seeing now. So this type of VAT reduction on rental cars, yes, that's good, but I also want to see this type of incentive extended to other industries that can help us produce more and add more value at home as well, and linking that back to our tourism industry in many ways.
Paul, I put that question to you as well, and I'm just going to read it again for the persons who might have not heard. Rental car companies are to be recognized as tourism service providers, and the various tax adjustments and concessions will apply in line with other providers. Approved rental car companies will be granted duty-free VAT exemptions after 5 years on all electric and hybrid vehicles. A good move.
I would say a good move, and I like the condition where they must evidence and demonstrate that I think it's 60%.
60%
of the revenue is deposited within our banking system.
Yes.
So not under the table, action.
I am not going to go there, Barry, but I think I believe in concessions for the tourism industry, and where car rental companies clearly can demonstrate. I mean, invariably they're part of the tourism industry, right? So no issues with granting the benefit. I always thought that concessions should be tied to confirmation and evidence that the dollars received and that are subject to the concession are deposited in Barbados and not outside of Barbados. Right. And I think that was always a gap. When I learned about it, I was very disturbed that we would give concessions to anyone where the funds are not, at least some proportion, significant proportion of the funds are not lodged in Barbados. So no issues there from the chamber perspective.
ICAB?
No, again, made excellent points. Certainly it would enhance the competitiveness of that sector. But certainly to what has happened there is that the sector also has to maintain strict discipline.
Yes.
As it relates to the requirements to deposit, which is good for in the broader scale of things for the country. So I think that it's a good initiative for the tourism sector, and I'm sure that the persons within that sector are certainly happy with this instrument.
This is a layman question that you can tackle, Shawn, because this is dealing with the dash cams. Dash cams encouraged for all vehicles. Government encourages that all vehicles install a working dash cam with a minimum of 32 gig of storage. The dash cams is something that I really think is necessary. The insurance industry called for this only early last year. They called for all cars to have dash cams front and rear. Because now police are not even coming to accidents anymore. So that is helping them solve cases per se. Also something that government are keeping a close eye on because of, one, the traffic congestion, and two, the high number of accidents that are disputable, in dispute with insurance companies in Barbados.
Yes, Barry, I think that's a good initiative in terms of making the system more efficient and making the lives of the insurance companies and motorists better. I think it will come down to a question of access to the dash cams and affordability. I think the minister did mention some incentive to purchase the dash cams. But what's the number of vehicles we have on the road? 180,000 plus or more?
So many.
So that's not something that's going to happen overnight, certainly in terms of equipping all vehicles with dash cams. But in terms of a policy, I don't have a problem with the idea.
Paul?
So I'm an insurer, and I once lived.
Perhaps a bad man to ask.
Yeah, I once lived in that space in another life.
Yeah,
I would say again, it is an initiative. Really, truly, as I drive around Barbados and you drive behind somebody, you're seeing the dash cams, right?
Yes.
And I think they're vitally they're critical to how we manage the whole. Or how we help manage the accidents that occur on our roads. I think they save a lot of time. They actually clear up a lot of issues. I've personally had to rely on a dash cam that actually demonstrated that what the other person said was not true.
Right.
So people not knowing that you have a dash cam, it works in your favor. So I don't see a negative to it. How are you going to fund it, though? So you're going to buy dash cams for everybody that need a dash cam?
Well, I mean, it is something that they might look at.
Is that the proposal?
No,
The proposal is they're providing an incentive.
they're providing an incentive.
Right.
So remove the
Exactly.
tax or
Correct.
taxes or something.
Correct, for a
Similar
particular
to
period of
security
time.
systems.
Security system.
Exactly, the
There you go.
CCTV and
So a very good move, even for security
Yes.
systems, right? Barbados can become a more secure
Sure.
place. Certainly loss prevention.
Yeah.
Or risk reduction, loss reduction. If we can encourage our people and incentivize them to actually purchase security systems for their homes and also dash cams for their vehicles, I think it would bring some order.
Level of security.
Yeah.
But in terms of the dash cams too, I do know the insurance industry, motor insurance claims is a big issue for the general insurance industry.
It is a very, very big issue.
Settling disputes, and the dash cams help in many respects.
But I think, but just to jump in on that, I think it is positive. The only question I have is that there are wider issues at play. Having, removed the police from coming to accidents, I do think I would want to have an update as to how many accidents are taking place on the roads, how they're being investigated, how many people may be leaving accident sites. Now, the dash cams can help perhaps in identifying those vehicles, but I also would have hoped that there would have been something in there to address the number of people who are not being insured.
Right.
It doesn't have to be in a budget, but certainly there has to be some kind of policy supported by a stronger legislative framework to address the number of people who are driving around uninsured, because that poses significant challenges to people who get injured and simply cannot be compensated. The insurance companies don't have to pay, right? If someone is comprehensively insured, they will have to pay out for the benefit of their insured, and then they will have to try to go after the individual who was not insured and who struck the person. The dash cams can help to identify, hopefully, that vehicle or something like that. But I think there still needs to be more involvement from government in addressing that significant problem.
We only have 6 minutes left on the program. I'm going to actually go around the table and give everyone a chance to perhaps give their mark out of 10 or percentage as to how they rate the budget. Let me start with you, Justin Ram. Out of 10, how do you give this budget a grade? What out of 10 or what percentage out of 100 do you give the budget?
Give the budget 6 out of 10 simply because
I didn't hear that.
I give the budget a 6 out of 10.
Oh, 6 out of 10. Okay.
Yeah, simply because I think it's doing what I've heard many times before, providing this type of relief whenever there is a crisis, and not enough emphasis on the type of transformation that I think I'd like to see. Because at the end of the day, if you focus on transformation, then that would be the headline that you would see in the newspaper the day after, not on the, I guess, benefits for cost of living support. So again, I just say 6 out of 10 because I really want to see more transformation.
6 out of 10. Damian, Skeete, ICAB, what do you rate the budget?
Yeah, I would just like to just make a correction to something I said before. First, when I was giving the numbers as it relates to the income tax, right? Yeah. It's really what I gave you there would have been for the pensioners.
For the pensioners,
For the pensioners, right? So they would receive, if it was $100,000 for a pensioner, they receive at least $3,500 more, right? But for the income tax, the personal person who's at $100,000, they would have an increase of just about $810 or $800, right? So, having said that, first, I just want to make that clear in terms of
reconcile the numbers.
Sure.
Yes.
Leaving the wrong impression. But certainly the budget, without putting a number, it was certainly satisfactory or above, because it touched on some points that I think is needed in terms of, as I mentioned from the beginning, which is some level of economic diversification which was needed. But what it has also touched on too was the fact then that there's a lot of spending which is going to require a level of accountability. Yeah. And we didn't speak a lot about that, but accountability is going to be key. And I think that is where too the profession comes in terms of governance and governance issues.
So 7 out of 10?
I would say, don't pay me 10. Yeah, it was above satisfactory.
All right, sure. 7 out of 10. Kristin, Turton.
I would say 7.
7 out of 10.
And I say that because, as I said, I think it responded relatively well, or did as much as it could, to address cost of living concerns and the international crisis. I think there are efforts to look at diversifying the economy in terms of the giga, and then incentives for the film sector, which we didn't get to discuss. I like the concept of the gun courts being implemented and funded. However, just from a legal perspective, I think my concern is that I don't think there was enough looking at the actual justice system as a whole, not just in terms of criminal justice, but in terms of civil justice, the number of people who are being affected by not being able to have their estates completed, the commercial courts, establishing that, family law courts, dealing with those emotional issues which then trickle down into criminal actions as well. I think that was effectively absent, and that was a deficiency. So those would be my concerns, as well as how well you can monitor and actually implement what is in here. I'm not convinced about that.
All right, Paul Inniss, 30 seconds, and your mark? I'm
a hard marker, Barry. So I think when you think of near term, medium term, long term, I would give them an 8 on the near term, right? The immediacy of the challenges. I think that they have done a pretty good job there. In terms of medium term, the policy position and proposals are reasonable. The real issue is implementation.
Yes.
And we need to get serious about implementing policy and proposals in Barbados, and not just pronouncing, right? So I think from a chamber perspective, we have always worked with government and the private sector in general.
We've got 30 seconds.
To try and participate in the implementation. So I'll give that a 7.
So your medium is 7.5.
So my medium is 7.5. My first one was 7?
No, 8.
8, right.
Next one's
near term.
Yeah.
And then I would give them 8 for the Bridgetown revitalization, because for us, that matters.
Okay.
Right? Bridgetown matters, and we need to revitalize Bridgetown.
Shawn, last 10 seconds, your rating. We got
I
the news
would
in a
give
minute.
them a comfortably pass mark, 7.5.
7.5.
If you hear what the Minister of Finance said, really and truly, this budget was about giving people an ease.
Yeah.
And on that basis, you have to give them a passing grade.
All right, so we got a 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, two 7 out of 10s, a 7.5 and a 7.5 out of 10. I want to thank you so much. We want to thank you to the Science and Technology Festival starting on the 24th of March at 9:30. The future starts here. Admission is free, presented by the Ministry of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology in association with the Ministry of Educational Transformation and VOB 92.9 FM. This has been Inside the Budget. The conversation continues tomorrow, perhaps on Brasstacks. Policy intention versus implementation. It was a budget well worth listening. We look forward now to the implementation. I'm Barry Wilkinson. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.